it allows one to engage even more fully than you could if you aren't in prayer. I guess maybe it's Sojourners requires that the folks be the Sojourners community they say, until you're praying 2 hours a day, don't come visit us. We have very difficult work, and we want to make sure that you really have a grounding in your prayer life because you're just not going to be able to do the work and do it, with the kind of heart that we're called to give it, to do it with. So anyway, there's a thing called spiritual materialism. Okay, just like you can turn anything into a commodity, and the guru circuit of all the folks come around charging $1,000 for a weekend to hear some wonderful talk, and this is in Japan. Zen is actually being utilized by a lot of the big corporations for their managers to help their managers learn the Zen practice because it makes them more efficient and effective. One way of looking at this is that this prayer not only is a calming presence for us, but it makes us more efficient and effective during the rest of our lives. Well, if that's the primary end that you're working toward, you're not doing centering prayer. Okay, you're doing something else. You're doing, human development or something like that. But I'm saying an outcome of this process is that you become more effective and efficient and compassionate. But it has to do with, in centering prayer, with the fact that it is God moving within you and helping to free you from your blinders, from the dark spaces in your heart that constrict what we're capable of seeing and doing, and open those places up so that we can become more fully human. So we can be, each of us is unique in all of creation. Each of us is. There's no one like any of us who's ever been alive before. And there will never be anyone just like us who will be alive after us. We are unique beings, and God is offering to us the possibility of becoming the fully human being that He created or she created. Okay? So it's an opportunity, and each of us have gifts. This is the other part of the optimism. And each of us have unique gifts that no one else has ever had. No one. And we don't. And mostly we don't know those gifts. And similarly, we don't know what impacts we're going to have on all of creation. Everything that we do ripples throughout creation, and everything that we are has been a product of all of creation leading up to the particular, physical and spiritual and psychological presence that we are as a human being. So it's like we're embedded in this, in all of creation, just as in the Gospel of John, they talk about the Logos, the Logos being Christ and being there from the first, and we're all part of who we are. Goes all the way back to creation, part of what we are, and what we do will ripple through the rest of time, and we have no idea how that's going to ripple. How those ripples are going to work, and we're not in control of it. And part of this process is realizing, cool, I'd be just as happy about not being in control of the universe from now on. But things happen, grow out of groups of prayerful people, where tremendous positive changes do happen that aren't even anticipated. And so that's the kind of hope that I bring today about and encouraging us to engage in these practices such that we can be more hopeful, we can be freer, and we can particularly be freer to follow God's call to service. Okay? Well, let me hand these guys out. I'll tell you a story about how odd this practice is. I taught a class at Chicago Theological Seminary. Originally it was called Practical Theology of Mysticism, which my wife said was a triple oxymoron, because people say, well, prayer isn't very practical, and and theology isn't very practical, but it turned out to be a very popular class, and we would start each 3-hour class with a period of 20 minutes of silence in centering prayer. And it was kind of amusing. Every once in a while, somebody would stumble into the classroom early in the class, and we would be in silence. There'd be 35 people sitting there in silence. And so all these rumors go around about how I'm kind of goofing off and not teaching for 20 minutes every week. So I have people being in silence, and but it was a very helpful course for a lot of people. What I'll do is just talk about the method now. There are 4 guidelines in the middle of the brochure. I'm a licensed presenter of centering prayer, and if this were a regular sponsored workshop by Contemplative Outreach, which we'd spend about 6 hours doing what we're going to do in an hour. Okay, maybe so. We're not doing the full 9 yards, but I think I'll give you the essentials. And I think that's a good starting point. I was doing centering prayer long before I found out about Contemplative Outreach, and a lot of other folks were too. So the guidelines here have to do with a specific kind of centering prayer taught by Father Thomas Keating and his followers. Guideline 1: choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. So you see, this is about intention rather than attention. Praying the rosary is both intention, but the actual method is attention. You're attending to, and that's why it's this other strand of prayer. Then, sitting comfortably and with your eyes closed, settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. Now, how this differs from a mantric system is that in a mantric system, usually the mantra is said over and over again. It's repeated. In centering prayer, we identify a word that is going to symbolize our intention to move into a more intimate relationship with God. That's all the word is. It's nothing magical. It's nothing. It shouldn't cause too many associations to come up, because that would be counterproductive to what we're talking about. Use the same sacred word during a period of centering prayer. Don't change it during that period. Otherwise, the prayer, rather than being receptive, becomes you trying to figure out what word is going to work right. Okay, so the only action that you take during centering prayer, the only action is that when you notice that you're engaged by your thoughts, you return into the silence by ever so gently saying your sacred word, or bringing your sacred word into awareness. So it's not bad to have thoughts. That's going to happen. But the thing is, if you notice you're getting carried away, like you say, "Well, I'm feeling a little hungry," and say, "Oh, I bet that chili's pretty good." And how soon is this? At that point, you've left the silence. It's kind of like if you're talking to a dear friend and there's a big noise outside the window, and you kind of look away and you say, "Oh, excuse me." And at the end of the prayer, remain in silence and then slowly come back into the presence. Usually they recommend 20 minutes periods twice a day. That's the usual way that people who practice this. I don't do it that frequently. I do it almost every day, but not twice a day. Some people will read Scripture first. Some people will have petitionary prayers or other kinds of prayers that they say together or alone, and then come into the silence. Other people will come into the silence, and then afterwards will do it. It's a matter of just resting, literally resting in God's presence. And whenever you notice a thought come up, just ever so gently say your sacred word and come back into the silence. And there's no such thing as a bad period of centering prayer. You can't not do this right. It's impossible not to do this right.